It's time for Friday night's press preview. It's our first look at the front pages of Saturday's papers, and tonight we're checking out the headlines with HuffPost UK's political editor Kevin Schofield and The Sun's deputy political editor Kate Ferguson. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. A very good evening to both of you. We'll chat in a moment after we've had a look at the front pages, starting with the FT, leading with the lengthy inbound queues to the port of Dover caused by delays with post-Brexit border checks. The Telegraph reports that Foreign Secretary and Prime Ministerial candidate Liz Truss has told French authorities that the tailbacks are unacceptable and that they must get the situation under control. The Star conveys the frustrations of younger passengers in those queues, asking, are we nearly there yet? On that same story, the Mail proclaims, wish you weren't here. And the Mirror has the simple headline, Holes Chaos. The Eye carries a prediction from the economist Patrick Minford that Liz Truss's tax policies could mean interest rates reach as high as 7%. The Express splashes with a poll suggesting Liz Truss would beat Sir Keir Starmer in a general election, while The Guardian says that hundreds of laws on employment and environmental protection could be scrapped if Liz Truss carries out her pledge to axe all remaining EU regulations. Meanwhile, her opponent, Rishi Sunak, has given an interview to The Times in which he declares that Britain is in a state of national emergency, given the current landscape of the economy, the NHS and illegal immigration. And The Sun has word that TV personalities Paddy and Christine McGuinness are ending their marriage. And don't forget, you can scan the QR code you can see on screen during the programme, and you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers along with us. And tonight I'm joined by Kevin Schofield and Kate Ferguson. Lovely to see you this Friday evening. Pretty much all the front pages are covering the chaos that many holidaymakers face today as they headed to Dover. Kevin, the front of the Mail, wish you weren't here. Really, really bad start to the holiday, isn't it, for so many families?
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, the timing could hardly be worse, and you feel really sorry for all those families. The kids have just gone off on holiday, and they're looking forward to getting away after a pretty tough couple of years. Might well be their first holiday abroad for a couple of years. Probably trying to avoid the airports after reading about all the trouble getting flights. I think they'll try and get round that by going via Dover and getting snarled up with lots of traffic jams down there as well. It just feels like there's been a massive breakdown in the process, essentially, for enabling people to get from the UK into France. All sorts of accusations being thrown around by the UK government, accusing France of being ill-prepared, not having the correct border officials there to process passports. France saying that, no, it was a technical issue in the Channel Tunnel, and it's just a real mess. And obviously, unfortunately for the people who are left affected by it, they're stuck in traffic jams for up to 6 hours. Fractious kids in the back seat, obviously not very happy. The weather's pretty warm. It's just a pretty miserable start to the people's summer holidays.
Yeah, we were debating in the newsroom which you'd rather do, be stuck in an airport with miserable kids or be stuck in a car with miserable kids. I'm not quite sure which one is better. Front of the Daily Star, Kate, are we nearly there yet? Sort of echoing what Kevin was saying there. And there is this real blame game going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really grim, isn't it? It's meant to be the first day of the big summer getaway, and you've got 7-hour queues at Dover. I think people heading there in their cars were being told stock up on food and water before you get here. Sort of quite stark warnings. But as predicted, as soon as things like this happens, a bitter blame game immediately erupts. So you have the Brits blaming the French. We're saying, the guy that runs the Port of Dover is saying France woefully failed to turn up with enough staff to man the sort of booths where you would go through border checks. France are hitting back, insisting that they had planned for this day for a long time, but that a technical glitch apparently sent everything south at about 9 a.m. and that they've never managed to get on top of the tailbacks that caused. But interestingly, we're seeing Liz Truss, who we'll talk more about tonight, I'm sure, but the woman vying to be the next Prime Minister, but is currently Foreign Secretary, going in quite studs up on the French, telling them it's unacceptable, totally avoidable, and that they should sort it out. Now, while the blame game rages, I think Brits stuck in those kind of horrific queues will just want it sorted out as quickly as possible. But it looks like it's going to stick around at least for a few days. Warnings by some of the travel companies that we could face 4-hour delays tomorrow still. So
oh gosh,
grim.
yeah, really grim, really grim. It's interesting, Kevin. Adam Parsons, our Europe correspondent, saying tonight that sources are telling him that extra French personnel were brought in as planned, but they were late because they went to Folkestone and on their way to Dover got stuck in traffic. I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? But he was also saying, making the point that, you know, in the past, before Brexit, you sort of could just wave your passport pretty much to get through, whereas now you have to have it physically stamped, and that is slowing the situation down. It's sort of reflected in the FT row over post-Brexit border checks hits big holiday getaway.
Yeah, that's right. So I think even if everything was working as it should, things would still take a little bit longer than they would have done pre-Brexit, as you say, because people have to get their passport stamped now rather than just showing them to the passport staff. But as I understand it, I think that there should have been 12 booths there manned by French border officials, but only half of them were manned. So, you know, you add that to the fact that, you know, as we say, you have to get your passport stamped as well. That just adds a further delay onto it, which, you know, if it's for that for each person and there's thousands of cars trying to get through, it all adds up to, you know, these tailbacks that are lasting up to 6 hours, which must be absolutely horrendous for families concerned. So yeah, as I say, things would have been a little bit slower as a result of Brexit. However, you can't just blame Brexit for what has happened earlier today, and as Kate says, it's probably going to continue for quite some time.
Yeah, it's just a new procedure, isn't it? And clearly they're still sort of trying to work out the details when it gets incredibly busy. And talking about customs issues, let's move on to the story in the Daily Express, Kate, regarding the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Yeah, I mean, we've had this bubbling along for a while, haven't we? We in Britain are obviously tearing up parts of the Brexit deal, the Northern Ireland Protocol, without wanting to get too bogged down in the detail. This is at a big row about, again, excessive border checks on goods going between the mainland GB and Northern Ireland. Britain has said we're going to tear up that protocol effectively so that you can have free movement of goods between GB and NI. That's obviously caused a massive blistering row of the EU. And right in the middle of this Tory leadership debate, they've announced they're going to go ahead and sue us for breaching the Brexit deal. Now, there's a few cases rumbling on in the courts here, but I think if you look at the politics of it, it's interesting the EU have done this now. Brexit will play quite a big role in this Tory leadership contest, and both candidates taken quite a hard line, saying they would pursue this policy of tearing up the protocol, that it's important we stand up to the EU and sort these problems of trade out. And so this seems to be the EU asserting, I guess, quite early on in this contest that they're not going to sort of roll over and take that, and that they're willing and ready to have a big dust up with us in the courts about it.
Yeah, Kevin, a quick thought on this before we head to the break?
Yeah, well, it is actually an opportunity, I think, for both Tory leadership candidates, you know, to stamp their pro-Brexit credentials. Probably more pressure on Liz Truss, given, as we know, she campaigned for Remain back in 2016, and she doesn't really miss an opportunity to stress it now she's fully on board with the whole Brexit project. OK, great. Thank you for the moment. Coming up after the break, is Rishi Sunak right to say that Britain is in a state of national emergency? That and other Tory leadership stories when we come back. Hello again, you're watching the press preview with me, Kevin Schofield and Kate Ferguson. Front page of the Times, Kate. I mean, the next 2 weeks, I think, are going to be pretty crucial, aren't they, in the leadership contest? Rishi Sunak has got some ground to make up, and he's making a big pitch in the paper, and he's saying that Britain faces a national emergency on a number of fronts.
Yeah, exactly. So we're into the Tory leadership contest in earnest now. It goes over to the Tory grassroots. So expect lots more big interviews from the two contenders laying out their stall. This is Rishi Sunak's kind of first big policy interview, I'd say. He's had less to say on policy than Liz. And he's saying a few things. Number one, it's an economic emergency, he says. Number two, he says he's going to concentrate on doing three things: focusing on the economy, clearing the NHS backlog, and restoring order to our borders. And his kind of guts of the policy announcement he's doing today is that NHS backlog announcement. So he's saying, I'm going to create a vaccine-style task force. I will get waiting list times down by the beginning of next year, and I'll bring this kind of brewing crisis under control. To my mind, it'd be interesting to hear what Kevin thinks too, but I think that's quite a clever idea of Rishi Sunak. So he's obviously come under massive pressure in recent weeks about the fact that he backed this national insurance contribution rise, this big tax rise to fund the NHS. And I think what we're seeing Rishi here do is double down on that and wrap himself in the NHS flag. And he's trying to create kind of a clear dividing line between him and Liz Truss there, which I think is probably quite clever. You can't sort of out tax cut Liz Truss. She's offering £34 billion of tax cuts. So you've got to embrace your offering really and give voters a clear choice.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kevin, isn't it? Because so much of the debate so far has been on economic policy, and clearly he's now trying to pitch other policies in order to try and sway some of those party members who aren't sure about it.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head at the beginning there, where you said it's only going to be a couple of weeks before these ballot papers go out. And then obviously a lot of members will send those ballot papers back straight away. So, there's really precious little time for Rishi Sunak to be able to change people's minds, before they actually vote. And I mean, I did have a little chuckle when I saw the front page as well. You kind of tend to forget that, these guys have been in power for quite some time. So if the country's in a national emergency, you wonder whose fault is that? I mean, Rishi Sunak was Chancellor for a couple of years and he's talking about an economic crisis. I'm not sure that reflects terribly well on his time in charge. I mean, obviously, you can say he had the pandemic to contend with. However, it's just a little bit ironic, I think, that both him and Liz Truss are now saying they are the change candidates when both of them have been central parts of the government for quite some time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kate, the front of the eye. Now, most people, I'm sure, haven't heard of Professor Patrick Minford, but he's causing quite a stir, isn't he? Tell us why.
Yeah, this kind of economics professor that's been thrown onto the front pages the past couple of days. He's one of Liz Truss's favourite economic experts. She quoted him approvingly only earlier this week. Anyway, he's gone and given an interview and admitted that Liz Truss's big tax giveaway will fuel inflation and will lead to big interest rates rises. So he's suggesting it could see interest rates go up to about 7%, which would obviously be a massive increase. You've kind of got a home trying to pay the mortgage. I think some of the mortgage experts quoted in the Eye front page that you just showed there, suggesting it could clobber families with another 700 quid on their monthly mortgage bill, which is eye-watering amounts, just as obviously the cost of living crisis bites. Not very useful interview for Liz Truss. Her team have been distancing themselves from his comments today, insisting that, yes, while she has quoted The Economist, he's not a formal advisor to her. But yeah, again, you're seeing these clear dividing lines between the two camps, aren't you? Do you believe Liz Truss can do these tax giveaways and it be pain-free, like Liz says? Or do you subscribe to Rishi Sunak's way of thinking, which is, you sort of have to kind of grin and bear it with the economic crunch that we're suffering now, because tax giveaways could have other punitive consequences on your interest rates and mortgage bills.
Yeah, although he does say they will come eventually, doesn't he? And let's finish with the front of the Daily Express. Again, talking about Liz Truss. They've done an exclusive poll, Kevin, who say that voters back her to beat Keir Starmer in a general election.
Yeah, although if you look at the detail, I think it's 1 percentage point between her and Starmer, so it's well within the margin of error, and we're obviously a couple of years out from general election. However, it is undoubtedly good news for Liz Truss. I mean, one of Rishi Sunak's strong arguments has been that he is the most likely candidate to be able to beat Labour at the next general election, because that's the other thing that Conservative members have now got to make their minds up about. It's not just who's going to lead the Conservative Party, who's going to be the next Prime Minister for the next sort of year or 18 months. It's who is going to lead the party into the next general election and they hope beat Keir Starmer. Now, they're starting off from a pretty poor position. They're round about anything up to 10, 11 points behind Labour right now. So, but yeah, it is a boost for Liz Truss. And again, it just puts Rishi Sunak on the back foot, because it puts a doubt in members' minds about whether he is actually the guy who can beat Labour at the next election. So again, as I was saying earlier, he doesn't have a lot of time to try and convince Tory members that he's the guy that they should vote for, and this poll certainly won't help him.
OK, just a couple of sentences on this, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, Rishi Sunak's big pitch, his main pitch is, vote for me, I'm the only guy that can beat Keir Starmer. If we start seeing more polls show that Liz Truss can as well, it massively chips away at that whole selling point and will be a problem for him. But let's see what the polls say.